Hello, I'm Yoshi Campbell, Executive Director of Coro Allegro. I just want to welcome you to the second of our Amplifying Black Voices series. Today's program, which we are so glad you're joining us for, is called A Conversation Still Needed, William Grant Still and Black Lives. And it features Jonathan Q. Berryman, Director of the Heritage Chorale of New Haven. I just want to give you a very quick roadmap to today's program. First, we're going to share conversations with Jonathan and with our guest, Judith Ann Still, advocate and archivist for her father's work, and mezzo-soprano Marietta Simpson, who graced us with her performance of the mother in William Grant Still's And They Lynched Him on a Tree in 1999. Interspersed, you will hear excerpts of that work, as well as Still's The Blind Man, performed virtually by Coro Allegro and the Heritage Chorale of New Haven. And then his heavenly Summerland, performed in 2016 by Darryl Hollister, Coro's beloved accompanist, from 1993 to 2019. At the very end, we're going to play you out with the inspiration of M. Rogers Holland's gospel setting of Lord, Make Me an Instrument, featuring both choirs. One last thing, the event is free, but donations to support this series are welcome. You can donate and read more about the program and the series at coroallegro.org. Thank you. I'm here with Jonathan Q. Berryman, Director of the Heritage Chorale of New Haven, and with my colleague, David Hodgkins, the Artistic Director of Coro Allegro. Welcome. Jonathan, can I start with you?
Sure.
I just wanted to say, as a singer in Coro Allegro, I got the chance to sing with your group in 2019. But I wasn't part of the original collaboration, which happened 20 years before that. And I know that many in our audience are not as familiar with the story or with your group. So I just wanted to start by asking you about the Heritage Chorale of New Haven and your relationship with William Grant Still.
So the Heritage Chorale of New Haven was formed in March of 1998, and it was actually formed to sing the William Grant Still, and They Lynched Him on a Tree. The New Haven Chorale's director at the time was Paul Mueller. Paul gave me a call and said, I want to program this piece that requires a white choir and a black choir to sing about a lynch scene. And I thought to myself, well, that's radical. And right up my alley. As I didn't know I was radical at the time, but I guess I am, right?
Yeah.
And William Grant Still was radical in his own right to even write the piece. So Paul asked if I could put together a group of African American singers to be the black choir. So I made some phone calls and some inquiries, and in March of 1998, on one Sunday afternoon, about 30 singers showed up in my living room, ready to sing. And I said, "Well, wow, this is phenomenal." So in many ways, the William Grant Still piece gave birth to the Heritage Chorale of New Haven, which is still together here in 2021.
That's quite the genesis story. That's for it to be a piece like this. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So it was, and what a piece it is. And even in our first performance of it, there was a lot of conversation around just the text. I don't know of very many pieces that sing about lynching. That require people to, in this case, the white choir to actually initiate the lynching, and then the black choir to respond to it. At least in the first 2/3 of the piece. So it's a challenging piece to sing personally.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. So that was a lot of the work that had to be done. And then, of course, singing the right notes.
Right. It's not an easy piece at all.
It's not easy. Yeah, that's right.
No. No, it's not an easy piece musically, and nor is it philosophically
No.
to sing.
When we sang with you in 2019, that was kind of celebrating your 20th anniversary. Yeah.
Exactly. And it was, we were delighted to bring the piece out again and to sing it, and we had no idea that it would still be so relevant.
David, can I ask you the same question? How did you come to learn about William Grant Stills and They Lynched Him on the Tree? And what is Coro Allegro's relationship to the piece?
Well, I first actually heard about it from Alan Harler, who conducts the Mendelssohn Club in Philadelphia, or used to conduct it. And he said, "This is a piece that's right up your alley. This is something you should do." And I agreed after looking at it. And so Coro decided to, do the piece, and we contacted people in Boston and formed a black choir through a church. And about 3 months before, like in January, early January, the choir contacted us and found out that Coro Allegro was actually an LGBTQ plus choir, and they didn't want to sing with people who were gay, which was a very difficult, very painful. I mean, we were already experiencing this very difficult discovery about the piece, and trying to muster the courage to sing it, and then to have that slapped down was doubly difficult. But had that not happened, we would not have been fortunate to find Jonathan and his group, because it was really a fabulous collaboration both times. So I heard about the performance in January, and that Paul was conducting, and went down to hear it, and it was wonderful. It was just wonderful. And so I went backstage and introduced myself and said, "Jonathan, we're doing the piece again in March. Would you be willing to bring your choir up to Boston to do that?" And I said, "Well, I don't know how we're going to pay for it, but we'll figure it out." And we did, and they did. It was just a wonderful weekend. We did this through the African American African American History Museum up on Beacon Hill, and they hosted the dress rehearsal. They hosted a whole day's events of speaking, and Judith still was there, and she was the main speaker, and we had an open dress rehearsal, as I recall, with students that came in for free to hear the piece and to talk about the piece, and also racism and whatnot. And it was just a great event. I mean, as it was a great event 20 years later when we celebrated our reunion, their anniversary and our reunion, I guess.
What was it like for the Heritage Chorale the first time when David came to you and asked you all to sing, and you heard the story of how the other chorus had to back out? Because you all stepped in the breach for us. I mean, you showed up for us.
Well, I think one of the things we addressed was the fact that the other choir backed out because they were challenged to deal with LGBTQ plus issues. Right? They couldn't rectify that within themselves to make it happen, and I think that was part of the conversation. And I grew up in a very conservative religious world, so I understand that battle. Mm-hmm. All right, and that's why I say sometimes we have to recognize when we are the mob.
Mm-hmm. I remember talking to Meg Oakes, who was president of Coro Allegro then, and she wrote a really beautiful piece about how hard that was for Coro. But there was a lot of understanding for the other choir, because I think one of the other issues, besides being uncomfortable with who Coro Allegro was just their difficulty on the trauma of singing the piece itself, Mm-hmm. So that all of that was combined.
I have to say that the courage of the singers to really undertake this, it took a lot of convincing, but and a lot of discussion, but in the end, it was well worth it. What makes the piece so difficult, of course, is that the stage directions were not something that we could actually do. It says for a white choir to start on stage, and they were supposed to leave the stage, and then the black choir was supposed to come in and do their part of the piece. and we just didn't have the wherewithal to do that. So we ended up with a solution where the black choir would stand in the front, um, but with their backs to the audience. And then the white choir was behind them, but facing the audience for the opening, which was just, choral, well, both choirs, here you are this far apart from these singers, these different colors, and talking about lynching. We strung him higher than the tallest pine, with them 2 or 3 inches away. And it was hard. It was hard for people, on both sides. And the conversations that happened before and after made it possible. It wouldn't have been possible just to kind of throw somebody together. So and then
So,
when the white choir finished that part, they then turned their back to the audience, and the black choir turned forward and sang their part. And what makes it all worth it is the choirs both come together and face the audience, and this amazing bond of unity is created at the end of the piece, and giving hope, to some sort of reconciliation, of this awful practice of killing people just because of the color of their skin.
and of course, singing the chorus, I was neither white nor black, right? And while Coro is predominantly white, it's also a mix of people. And so we had to deal with that. I mean, it's not the Grant's score. William Grant Still's score calls for a Negro chorus and a white chorus, and it's how you interpret that. And
in thinking about this piece, I also think about Emmett Till and the fact that his pictures were made public. So the visual images, even with this, the visual image of having two separate choirs, right? Who have who one singing about going lynching someone, one singing about finding the person who's been lynched, and then they're coming together at the end to talk about we have to stop this, essentially. So talking about even before we were using the term allies in terms of helping of what people do to help one another overcome injustice, William Grant Still had built the choir as an ally.
That's right. That's right.
He showed us what it means to be aligned.
Yes. Right. Which is, that's beautiful. And I'm thinking about what David said about the courage, what you both said about the courage of your singers.
Mm-hmm.
And because the thing is, Coro Allegro is not ever going to be just a white choir, even because it's also an LGBTQ plus, an allied choir, and that's the communities that have, in themselves, are all about building bridges, right? As David likes to say, between disparate communities, but also communities that come in with a lot of trauma. And so to come with that trauma and to sing a part where you're the oppressor is something that was really challenging. I mean, David, you talked about with your, about that moment where people were singing at each other. I ended up singing with the black choir, and I was looking at in the faces of the people I normally sing with, and they're singing these words, and I could see how hard it was for them and how hard it was for me. I remember at one point, one of my friends, who was a black singer, left the rehearsal space to work on a part by themselves for a while, and then came back in and found their friends singing about lynching. And just for a minute, even though they were glad to be part of a group that was doing this kind of singing and drawing attention to this issue, just for a minute, they were so triggered that they almost left. I remember talking to one of your singers, and she said, it made us family.
Right. So some of the singers in the Heritage Chorale moved up to the north from the south, and they are in a generation or two ahead of me. So they know all too well, especially in the group that sang in 1999. it was a tough piece to sing because of what they went through, even in their as children, and what they remember, the stories they were told in the places that they were from. So talking about triggering, right? That this is very hard. It's very hard. It's hard music to sing about because it causes reflection. You know, how do I sing this?
I don't believe we're free in America. I think we're haunted by our history of racial inequality. We're burdened by this legacy created by slavery and lynching and segregation. And whether you're born in 2017 or born in 1970 or 1930, you are affected by the environment that we have created by not addressing this history of racial inequality, of being silent. I don't think slavery ended in 1865. I think it evolved. We had mobs of thousands of people gathering in courthouse yards and fields and doing horrific things to people, and we haven't done anything to acknowledge that. It is American history. And for us to recover from that violence, from that terrorism, we all have to know it and we have to talk about it. I think it will compel us to think differently about what we need to do to correct the past, to address the past, but also how we make a better future.
As I think about the William Grant Still piece, I really think it should be performed every year, in the same way that choruses perform Handel's Messiah every year. And They Lynched Him on a Tree is an American story, and in the William Grant Still version, we're looking at the racial history of America as it existed between what was considered white and what was considered black, right? Where you have this lynch mob going after a black man, and hence the two choirs, the white choir, black choir. But we know that the injustices are not just black and white in this country. Sometimes it's not based on color. Sometimes it's based on gender preference. All right, straight versus gay. Sometimes it's based on xenophobia, American versus Arab. Sometimes it's based on class, right? Wealthy versus those who are not wealthy. So the William Grant Still piece helps us to look at injustice as we know it right here on the soil of the United States of America.
So let's just talk about the piece itself. And They Lynched Him on a Tree by William Grant Still. In Katherine Garrison Chapin's original libretto, she doesn't choose to depict the lynching itself in the text.
What he did was use the overture as a depiction, really. I was going to say a metaphor, but it's not a metaphor. It's a depiction of an actual lynching. And you hear from the very beginning this very angry but soft rhythmic motive and strong accents, and it builds and builds and builds slowly. And that's really a depiction of the crowd coming almost down the street. You can feel that, and the emotions being whipped up, to a real mob mentality. And it moves forward and it keeps driving until one point there's this big crash of a chord.
So the when I think about the opening and William Grant Still's masterful writing, in many ways he was even ahead of Hollywood in terms, because prior to my hearing this piece, the motives he used back in 1940, I associate with the movie Psycho.
Yeah.
So he does a wonderful job of depicting disturbance, actually.
Yeah.
So he wrote the overture in a way that let you know that something unsettling was happening, and then the choir enters with this almost satisfaction. So the juxtaposition of this writing, musical writing, that lets you know that something isn't right, with this idea of people being satisfied with what they've done, is incredible.
We've sung him higher than the tallest pine. We've cut his throat so he can go to wine. Come along, fellas, come along home. Come along, fellas, come along home. Come along home, so down the clouds. See what I'm thirsty, and nothing makes you wrong.
Per his correspondence, still really struggled to set that lynching in music. And he actually said, to date, I've considered and discarded about 40 or 50 themes. And then finally, he settled on that marked rhythmic motive, which the orchestra opens, and he labeled it in the score excitement in his sketchbooks. Then there's that weird tritonal melody that you hear, and he labeled that the wounding power of prejudice.
They took away his freedom in the name of the law, but justice was a slow thing to be waiting for.
They broke someone out of jail to hang him, but there are questions about whether or not giving him life was the right thing to do. All right. So William Grant Still, in his savviness, and Catherine Garrison Chapin in her savviness, really wrote about this as being problematic then. We now know, in our own era, how many people have gone to jail and behind evidence that was trumped up or was insufficient. And now they're being released 20 years later, 25 years later, as people have gone on their behalf and have fought for their freedom.
It just really makes you think of the courage of William Grant Still in 1940. Because, it's in the middle of a world war. And like you said, Jonathan, this is a piece absolutely about racial justice and about Black civil rights. But the performance history was complicated right away by what was happening in the rest of the world, right? Because I think the conductor of the premiere was afraid to do this piece that he had been excited to do, because he was worried, as a Jewish man who was trying to get his sister, I think, and his niece or something like that over safely to America as immigrants, that his ability to advocate for the safety of his family would be compromised by the racist reaction to the courageous stand that William Grant Still and Catherine Garrison Chapin or Catherine Biddle were taking. And so he actually begged them to change the ending, if I remember correctly. So I know you had like this weird situation where I think in the premiere, the chorus sang the original words, but what was printed in the program was not what was sung, but something safer, to protect the conductor.
I'm so happy that people are discovering the music and especially the lynching piece, because it's such a key to healing the past, the scars of the past.
Thank you so much, Judith, for agreeing to do this, first of all, because to have your voice not involved would not have been right. So I'm so glad
You're very kind. I think there are a lot more people who know more about William Grant Still's music than I do. But as for the man, he was top drawer. He went traveling in the South with Handy's band. He was playing the cello and a number of other instruments. And the people in the backwoods in the South wanted the best music in the country, and even though they didn't like to admit it, the best music came from the Black Boys. So they always hired Handy's band, and they'd travel out there in a buckboard and play for their dances and so forth. And after one of their digs, they were going back to town, and the white driver said, "Get down, boys, don't let them see you." And coming down the road was the Ku Klux Klan dragging a teenage Negro boy, and he said, don't say a word. So they had to pull into a culvert and watch this terrible thing happening, and he never got over that. But this incident with the lynching was actually what got my father into classical music. Because after the lynching, he went back to his bed at night, and he was just shaking. And he knelt by the bed, and he prayed to God that somehow he might do something in his life to end these atrocities. And suddenly a giant archangel came into his room and told him that if he would go into classical music and never give it up, that the Lord God would provide always food on the table and a roof over his head, and he would always be protected, even though there would be people who would attack him over the years. They couldn't get him out of music. So he did. He always had food on the table and a roof over his head, but I'm telling you, we didn't have much more than that.
I'm just very moved and shaken thinking of your father's trauma as a young man, and that brought him to music.
Oh, absolutely. And he had to have that push of something important to conquer, and the feeling that the Creator was asking him to do that, because it was a very brave thing for a black man to set out to get into classical music, because it was purely the white man's thing in those days. When it was suggested to him, he realized that his experience would give motive and impetus to the music. There's a lot of feeling in that music.
It sure is.
And there's a lot of his agony in that music.
Yes.
Yes, there is.
And when you see what happened to Mr. Floyd, my God, it's still there. It's all still there.
Judith, could you just say a couple of words about the history behind the piano piece Summerland, which Darryl has played so beautifully many times? Is there a story behind that?
Well, actually, it started with the three visions for piano.
Right.
The first part of the three visions was Dark Horseman, which meant the spirits coming to take the soul of the dead person to the other dimension. And the second piece was Summerland. Summerland is about life after death and how beautiful and how peaceful it is. About my father's belief in reincarnation and life after death. But Summerland is his vision of the other dimension, and he actually, in his dream, said he went there, and high spirits, counselors on the other side, took him to high places and taught him the secrets of the universe.
I'm curious, was 1999 the first time that you sang "And They Lynched Him" on a tree?
Here's how, honestly, how I approach everything. I try to, and I hope it doesn't sound pretentious, but I really try to approach every time like it's the first time I've ever done anything. And so, and I got that from Robert Shaw, who, although he had done a million messiahs, he always approached it like it was the first time. So I really don't ever keep a record of how many times I have done a piece. Mm-hmm. So really, my first recollection of doing that piece was with you, David.
So I'm curious, just because it was 1999, which was some years ago. Mm-hmm. And it was my first time hearing you and being in your presence. And we were in the meeting house, and I don't even remember what you sang. I remember how I felt when you did, which was transcendent for me. So as I think about that experience, as David already mentioned, because that weekend was truly an experience, more than it was a performance. I'm thinking, I'm curious to know, not so much about your process, but more about your response to having to prepare for this piece.
I will say this, that, you know, the normal process of making sure the notes are right, making sure the music is right, all of those things was part of the process, right? But then coming together with, first of all, playing through the music again, overwhelming for me, because I am a very empathetic person, right? And just imagining this mother's emotional journey, right, was very difficult. And then I have to step away from that because otherwise I can't sing, right? Because it's just overwhelming. But I have to walk through that, because if I don't, then I feel like I can't tell the story if I have not allowed myself to go through that. And what I also know about myself as a performer is if I don't do it beforehand, it will come, but it will come in the performance. And I don't want it to come in the performance. So I want it to come ahead of time so I know how to deal with it in the performance when the emotion is really, 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 really high. So because in the performance, even though I've had that moment, there is going to be a moment when the audience energy and the choir energy and the instruments and all of that playing is going to bring its own set of energy. It's hard to explain, but what I feel like is the person who's given the responsibility of telling this story. Mm-hmm. and communicating the message that is so important to tell this mother story, to tell this community story. And I can tell you the feeling when the Black chorus comes out of hiding and they do that first. Oh my God. It is the most overwhelming thing. Look there, look there. Oh my God, this moment, I feel it now, because how many times throughout history has the Black community had to face that emotion of, oh my God, look at what has been done, right? We've seen this moment. We've seen this moment with Breonna Taylor. We've seen this moment with Dante White. We've seen this moment with George Floyd. And so I felt like I was given the responsibility of conveying this story. and conveying the emotion of the community. And I'll tell you, it might feel like it would be daunting, but it also feels like a privilege to be able to tell that story. And that was also part of the process. I don't know any other way to say that.
Maria, can I sort of follow up a little bit on that?
Yeah.
I know that you have children, but had you already had children by that
In,
point?
in 1999?
Yeah.
Yeah, my daughter's 13 years old.
Okay.
Yeah, I have
So
one daughter.
so did that make a difference in the way you approach the piece, do you think? Or
I think so. I think when you have a child finally, or if you don't have children but you have siblings or nephews, or if you can, if there's anybody in your life, I say this because I don't think you need to necessarily be a mother, but if there's someone you care about that you can imagine this happening to, I think you can put yourself in that position. And that's what I think is amazing about this piece, is because when you look around the world and you see all of these stories about man's inhumanity to man, and this unbelievable ability of humankind to other the other person, and how we in some way justify when we see people as different from ourselves, and then the brutality we're able to then do to these people who are not like us, so it's okay. You don't necessarily have to be a mother.
And I'm curious, what did you find to be the most challenging part of this piece?
The subject matter to me is the most challenging part of the piece, really. Having to sing about it, honestly, is the most challenging part of the piece. And then, doing some research, because, you hear the term lynching, it doesn't do it justice, right? Because the word doesn't sound as awful as it is, right? And so the piece is not easy. It's low. It sits in the low musically. It's in the low tessitura, right? And so, so just kind of vocally, just bridging the registers and all those technical things, musically. But it's so beautifully written, right? So, and it's luscious, and it's really a lower voice mezzo dream to sing. I have to tell you that. So, and that first, oh sorrow. I mean, that is just like a dream to sing. It's so beautiful, right?
Oh,
thank you, William Grant Still. Because if ever you wanted to capture a mother's sorrow, when she says, "What have they done?" I mean, it's like, take my heart, rip it out. You know, he captured it in music. It's perfect. You know, and honestly, if that was a part I would want to sing every day until the Lord calls me home. Okay, because that's how perfect I think it is.
Can you describe the impact that this piece has had on you as a musician?
Some pieces you do, and you're happy you've done them. You're happy for the work, because you know we're troubadours. You know, we sing the song, we move on to the next job. We sing the song, we move into the next job. But this piece left a mark. You know, there are pieces that touch your life because it's more than the music. And this piece is like that. I mean, this piece told, it wasn't, and every piece, you have to understand, I love music deeply. Like, I can listen, and I don't, this is not trite because it's true about me. I can listen to any piece of music and locate something about myself in it. But the thing about this piece, I felt like I was telling part of my story and part of my history in this piece. And for a people who history is so deeply important because we were robbed of so much of our history, this piece is significant in that way. So to be able to sing in a genre, number one, that we don't generally in the Western canon have a lot of pieces that represent us. And then also that piece is telling part of our story. It was deeply meaningful to me, deeply meaningful. And I will carry that with me always.
And Jonathan said something, because you mentioned the Messiah, all right? Didn't you just, yeah. Jonathan said, when we were talking to him earlier, he said, William Grant Still and They Lynched Him on a Tree should be performed annually, like Handel's Messiah, because we have things to learn from it. And I'm just curious what you think of that idea.
I think it's a brilliant idea. I think it's a brilliant idea. Yep, absolutely. I think we're afraid to continually look at things. We're like, oh, we've done that. Let's move on from that. We've talked about that. Let's move on from that. But you know, I think we can move on when it doesn't hurt, when we're not smarting every time, you know, and when we see that we've made changes, when we see that we've really, you know, when we really have done things instead of giving lip service to things, has been. And when that happens, yeah, maybe not. But until that time, we have to keep confronting the things that have been swept under the rug. And when we see the state our country is in right now and the state that the world is in right now, yes, we should be doing this piece over and over and over again. Because you think people have heard, everything you think people have heard and know, and we take for granted that people know, they don't. They don't know. And the songs that I assumed students knew, I assumed everybody knew We Shall Overcome. Everybody doesn't know that. There are lots of people that don't know that. We did a program here a few years ago, and I said, okay, we're going to end the program with We Shall Overcome. Started playing it. Deer in the headlights from some people. And I was surprised by that. But I was like, you know what? That means somewhere along the line, we failed to keep saying the things and singing the songs that we had been singing, thinking that was progress, but that's not necessarily progress. You know? So yes, I totally agree with you, Jonathan. We should be doing this.
That's amazing. That song was America from my immigrant mother coming over, you know, in the late 50s and early 60s. That was the song. I still remember her singing it with a great deal of vibrato to me as a child, and with a Japanese accent. And you know, but that was the America she was looking to join.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's kind of amazing to think, right, that your students don't have that in their bones yet. Yeah,
right.
But there are other songs. But yes,
yeah. That's a very beautiful story too. It's a beautiful story.
My mom was a Hiroshima survivor, so.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, I hadn't told you that, Jonathan. Yeah.
No.
She was the age of your daughter, the 13.
Wow.
No, that is significant. And so there are a lot of stories that need to be told.
Yes.
Certainly yours, Yoshi, and that of your mother, because we don't know. And we can't assume that other people know because we know. And that's why in looking at the William Grant Still, you know, we've all I can't even say we've all heard about lynching, but it was certainly part of my growing up experience. But I to hear about lynching and to perform an 18-minute piece about it is a whole nother experience.
Right.
I think there's this piece. It's one of the few pieces where multiple people in the audience came up and said, "Time stood still for me." Like it could have been a 15-minute piece. It could have been a 2-hour piece. They had no idea. They were just so engrossed in the moment, like you're saying, and then it takes a while at the end to come back. You know, I mean, I don't know if you remember, but there was that long viola note at the very end that just fades to nothing. And then there was a good, I don't know, 20 seconds maybe of silence, you know, maybe even 30. It was a long, long time. And then you finally heard people kind of in the audience and on stage just kind of finally relax and take a breath.
Well, it's interesting that this is one of the pieces where applause almost seems out of place.
Mm-hmm.
And that is that's one of the things about it that I think makes it such an incredible piece of art, because it allows you true space to reflect, to lament, to cry, to hope.
Yes.
And in some ways, the appropriate response, David, just as you said, is silence. And that's, I think that's how you know that you've done it right. That people want to sit and reflect in that moment and really think about what they've just seen. And I think part of that is, I know for me, is not just hearing the piece, but it's also making that connection to history, making that connection to the present,
Right.
making that connection to my own life,
Right.
to the lives of the ancestors I did not know.
Right.
And as I said in an earlier part of this segment, making the connection to when I am the oppressor.
Right. Hmm.
But I thank you all, Coro Allegro, for even this conversation,
Yes.
because I do think it will have lasting impact.
So Eric Gustafson asks, is the full performance of this piece available, or will it be available following today's program?
Yes, it's a piece well worth listening to for the whole thing. It's very hard to get the dribs and drabs, but even with the dribs and drabs, you can certainly feel the impact of the work, no question.
We should look into what it would take to record it. That's what I think. Carolyn France is asking, do other cultures have music that helps educate them about atrocities in their past?
Well, certainly when Coro commissioned Kareem Rustam, which is a piece about the Arab Spring a few years ago, the Poulenc Figure du Man, which is that way, talks about the atrocities of World War II. And I'm sure there are many, many, many others. You know, the Britain War Requiem is certainly one. But well, even the piece that we did from Eric Banks, you know, A Luta Continua.
How can we inspire young people who are watching the statues perpetuating the whitewashing of history and the repeal of laws that disenfranchise folks to seek out music like this and stories like this?
Well, I think when you continue to present events like this, it alerts people to the fact that music like this exists. That William Grant Still is very much an American composer, yet his music is still being discovered by many. If it takes at least 6 pills to cure the common sinus infection, what makes us think that hearing this piece one time is enough to help America address its challenges? It has to be. That's why we need to constantly be in conversation about America. We still need to talk, right? And I'm so grateful to William Grant Still for 70 plus years ago having the foresight to even create this piece that is still speaking to us today and the situations that we see in the daily headlines.
Absolutely. And to imagine taking something that is so horrific and allowing that to be inspirational for art, and how to take the pain of that, and out of that pain, something so beautiful can stand the test of time, to be able to take something like that and it transports a message to so many people, to allow us this many years later to still to be educated in that moment, to take that around the world. It's truly a gift that he gave to all of us, really.
You know, when David mentioned Eric Banks' A Luta Continua, I just want to invite you all back because we haven't scheduled this yet, but there's going to be another of these programs with Reginald Mobley, countertenor, and he's going to be coming and talking about that piece with the composer, Eric Banks. And we hope that Ron Williams will be able to join us then. He unfortunately was not able to come today because of a family matter. So we really miss his presence, but hope that we can bring him back for that program, which should be very, very powerful. And it's a contemporary passion about David Chisuli, a Ugandan LGBTQ plus activist who was also lynched, murdered, and his legacy, and for all Black lives. And Coro is in the process of, we've recorded it and we're in the process of producing an album about that. So I encourage you all to come back.
I just wanted to add one thing. That 22 years ago now, when Coro was just an early young group, and Heritage Chorale was just forming, we were so lucky and privileged to have Marietta join us for this performance, because I know that she had done it with Alan Harler, and Alan, I'm sure, gave it a pretty good recommendation for Coro. But you were already an established star, really, and as your addition to the performance was just magical, and it made the whole. I mean, the whole weekend was magical. It was an experience, and you were a large part of that. And I just want to thank you for taking that risk on us.
You say that, and I really truly appreciate that. I keep telling you, I never thought I was taking a risk. I thought that we had an opportunity to make music together, and I was really honored and privileged to do that. So I appreciate you very much. And I have to say, I told you all this before, I'm a little bit of a crier. And so when you played that recording, I was like, oh no, I don't think I'll be able to talk afterwards. It just brought me back, to the meeting house. And it really is, it's such a special piece. And I'm so glad that we got to share that, Jonathan, David, and I with the Yoshi, I'm sorry that that you were not there in this moment, but I'm happy to share this moment with you to talk about it. It really was a special time that we got to share that, and I'm really very grateful for that. So thank you for having me.
Thank you all so much. And speaking of sharing music, I'd like to share another virtual choir that Jonathan's group, the Heritage Chorale of New Haven, and David's group and my group, Coro Allegro, performed on. And Jonathan, do you want to introduce it? Because I know it has a special meaning for your group.
So the composer, M. Roger Holland II, I've known for probably 2 decades. And it is a piece of the Heritage. This piece is a piece of the Heritage Chorale has sung before. It's just one of those pieces that has almost like the still. It is stuck after my first hearing and performance of it. It has just stuck with me and has become a part of who I am as a musician. There's some pieces that you don't have to call to remembrance; they call you. And this piece is one of those.
On that note, Lord make us an instrument.